All right, whenever you're ready. You're fine. It's okay. We're all sick. It's okay.
Since the early 21st century, modern social media platforms from MySpace to Instagram have taken the world by storm. And even before then, ancient forms of social media have existed. Nearly a third of the Earth's population is currently active on social media, with teenagers making up a disproportionate amount of that statistic. This arguable overuse of social media by young people leads one to question: how does all this time on social media affect the mental health and social lives of the teens consuming it? An investigation into the historical, social, and scientific perspectives of the issue of social media would suggest that this amount of social media use negatively affects the mental health and social lives of the youth consuming it. Historically, social media has been around for thousands of years in the form of social networking. Social networking in ancient times is described as the ways in which people are connected culturally, socially, and politically with each other. According to research supported by the National Science Foundation, an independent United States governmental agency, American Indian tribes from around 900 CE up until the arrival of European settlers used this social media in positive ways, like the sharing of the cultivation of maize across tribes, and also the importance of ceramics and personal relationships throughout what is now the southern United States. Another example of social media in ancient times can be found in the medieval European caste system described in the passage Life on a Medieval Barony. This is evident in farming practices of peasants, who typically would share techniques in farming equipment with one another. Social networking was also seen in medieval Europe throughout religion. Religion was one of the only things that connected the different castes to one another. Language throughout history is another example of social networking. Small languages like the Seri language, a language used by a small group of people near the western coast of Mexico, have been used throughout history. The Seri people participate in social networking via their native language, which they use to keep the culture, traditions, and language of their ancestors alive today. This is a picture of the Seri people. Social networking, the ancient social media concept, has impacted cultures in typically positive ways. It also helped lead to the eventual formation of modern-day social media sites and applications. Modern-day social media is defined as anything that allows the user to share content with friends, family, and followers via a created online profile, and allows users to stay connected with their friends culturally, socially, and politically. Platforms like YouTube, Twitter, and Snapchat are the main platforms that affect teens. They are some of the most commonly used by young people today. According to the organization Our World in Data, a nonprofit, nonpartisan collaborative research and data collection project between professors at Oxford University and several other nonprofits, over 3.4 billion humans are actively online using the internet and social media. Approximately 90% of youth in developed countries use social media and the internet. On average, these teens are spending almost 4.5 hours a day browsing social media. Aside from interactions at school, it can easily be deduced that social media is the most commonly used form of communication among teens, prompting one to wonder how this form of communication impacts teens. Socially, the use of social media and the internet by teens themselves are not inherently harmful, their overuse are. While the occasional use of social media can strengthen communication amongst members of the family, the overuse of social media can actually decrease communication between teens and their parents. It is also found that an overuse of social media can increase a teen's self-conscientiousness and gives the user the notion that others lead a better life than them. This leads the user to potentially judge their family members based around this notion of perfection given off by social media, leading to negative conversations and relationships between children and their parents. Overall, an overuse and misuse of social media can negatively affect the mental health and social lives of teenagers. The lack of communication caused by an abundance of social media use on teenagers has an effect on teenagers in a scientific way as well. According to a scientific, professionally reviewed article from the Ontario newspaper The Record, the brain circuits of teens who overuse social media and the internet can become weaker in a way that makes it harder for those teens to read emotions and mannerisms and having a face-to-face conversation with another person. The weakening of these particular brain circuits can render the affected teen unable to read social cues and increasingly socially awkward. Additionally, overconsumption of social media can harm the comprehension skills of teens, negatively affecting their performance in school and their social lives. On top of altering the brains of teens in a way that is harming their social skills, the overuse of social media and the internet can affect teenage brains in another, more dangerous way. Social media can actually increase teenagers' risk of self-harm and even suicide. Social media and the internet can expose children to graphic images of self-harm at the click of a button. Social media companies typically do a poor job at restricting and deleting graphic content further inflating the chances that harmful images can be exposed to teens surfing the web. This is according to The Lancet, a nonpartisan journal that is peer-edited by specialists in science and mental health fields, and used by governments around the world to make health and science decisions. It is logical to conclude that a vessel of any kind that can increase the teenager's chances of self-harm or even suicide is detrimental to that teenager's mental health. To limit the harmful effects of social media, preventative measures and initiatives must be put in place by both parents and guardians as well as governments around the world. Ideally, to limit the overuse of social media and the internet, parents need to start setting limits to the amount of time teenagers are allowed to access media. This solution would need to involve a huge change of culture in households worldwide, one that would need to be aided by governments from all across the globe. Initiatives that educate parents and teens alike on the dangers of social media must be created to inform them of the negative impact the overuse of social media has on teenagers' mental health. This solution is limited in its potential effectiveness, however, due to the fact that it would be a voluntary practice for families. It also would require funding, something some countries just don't have, as well as support from a large number of first world countries or a coalition like the United Nations, which is something that might be controversial in these countries' respective legislatures. The best solution to the negative impact on teenagers would be action involving social media companies themselves. Legislatures around the world should pass legislation that forces large social media companies to attempt to get rid of content showing or promoting self-harm or suicide. This would limit the risk of teenagers wanting to self-harm or commit suicide. Social media companies can in turn help to remove the notion that certain lifestyles are superior to one's own by removing the obvious source of that notion. Measurables like likes, favorites, or other similar measures are something that Instagram has already started doing on their platform in certain areas of the world. This solution only has two major limitations, the first being the passage of legislation. Passing legislation in some governments is a very difficult thing to do, which might limit the effectiveness of the solution if some governments around the globe couldn't pass a measure like that in their respective lawmaking body. The second limitation to this solution would be getting companies to agree to remove measurables, something that could be potentially forced with legislation, however. No matter the limitations, something must be done to combat the negative effects of social media. And the most plausible answer as of now is legislation by governments around the world, as well as the removal of likes and other measurables by social media companies. To summarize, research suggests that the overuse of modern social media is harming the mental health and social lives of teenagers around the world. This overuse is harming teens socially and scientifically, something that does not align with the historical effects of social media or social networking. With the proper solutions like creating government legislation for social media companies and removing measurable statistics such as likes from social media platforms, this problem can be fixed, helping to end the current detriment to the brains and social lives of millions of teenagers.
Okay. How did you handle the differing perspectives in order to reach a conclusion?
So I use the historical perspective to help aid creation of modern day social media. I talked about social networking and how American Indians and Europeans in the European caste system aided the creation of modern day social media because people are always going to want to stay connected in some way. So you can see the influence of social networking, which is the ancient form of social media, on today's social media platforms like Instagram and stuff like that.
Explain the level of certainty you have about your conclusion, solution, or recommendations.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Explain the level of certainty that you have about your conclusion, solution, or recommendations.
My solution is very voluntarily based. So I would be more certain of my solution if I knew for a fact that things like legislation and the action by social media companies could happen. But because that's so voluntary, it might just not be able to happen. So.
Okay. Thank you.